The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Frankly Speaking. I'm your host today, Frank Zabarick, and I'm really excited about my episode today. I have a political action committee representative. He's got I think the longest job title of anybody I've ever had as a guest here on my show. His name is Neil Hubacker, from representing an organization called Cornerstone Action. And I guess they're a political action committee that kind of lobbies the New Hampshire state legislators on Christian type issues. And I guess according to your website, your motto is Cornerstone is dedicated to a New Hampshire where God is honored, religious freedom flourishes, families thrive, and life is cherished. So without any further ado, Neil, tell my audience a little bit about yourself as well as the Cornerstone Action Group.
Absolutely, Frank. First, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on the show. And just to add to the confusion of my job title, I actually do not work for the Political Action Committee because the PAC, we do have a PAC. We're actually three organizations. So Cornerstone has three entities. So the PAC, the Political Action Committee, is the one that can endorse or oppose candidates, and I don't do that. That's not a part of what I do. And then, like you said, there's Cornerstone Action, and that is the organization that does lobby regarding legislation, that is active in Concord. Lobbying regarding certain legislation. I actually don't work for them either. I work for Cornerstone Policy Research. And what that means is I'm mainly involved in the education, like educating people as to here's what the issues are, inviting them to be involved. So Cornerstone Policy Cornerstone Policy Research is the organization that educates, and my title, Director of Strategic Alliances, I know it sounds like it comes from the Pentagon, but actually it's really a church engagement role, strategic alliances. My job is to get allied with the church, but also with business entities, with education entities, anyone who'd be interested in some of our wheelhouse issues. And you mentioned what our wheelhouse issues are. We are for a God-honoring New Hampshire where religious freedom flourishes, families thrive, and life is cherished. So that kind of represents our wheelhouse issues. So when it has to do with wheelhouse issues, as the Director of Strategic Alliances, my job is to connect to churches and to the education sector and to the business sector if anything in our wheelhouse would connect with them, which it often does.
One thing I should have mentioned to you before, asked you before, the Cornerstone Action doesn't represent one denomination.
No.
It's more or less like evangelical Christians, like could have Baptists, Pentecostals, Church of Christ, Methodist.
Absolutely, Frank. And actually the tent is even bigger than that in the sense that we have, when I think of the big three parts of Christianity, we've got the Catholic faith, the Orthodox faith, and then the evangelical faith, or those kind of domains, if you will. And the great thing about Cornerstone is we have people who are with us from all three of those kind of streams of Christianity. And,
that's excellent.
And for good reason, because when it comes to family, faith, and freedom, usually all streams of Christianity, they really care about the issues that are happening in Concord.
So getting right into our discussion here on the issues, I guess one hot button thing that's come up, well, I guess in the state of New York, it's really bad there regarding the abortion issue. And I guess correct me if I'm wrong, abortions, when Roe v. Wade passed, it was supposed to be like early term abortions, like in the first 3 months. If you don't want the baby, just get rid of it. And there's arguments, debates there whether if it's a living being in the first 3 months. Now they've got what they call infanticide.
Exactly.
And that's either like a baby that survives an abortion attempt and is like crying and breathing, and yet they just let the baby die.
Right, and this was brought to our attention by the governor of Virginia in backing a bill that would just allow that exact thing. So, yeah, I'm so glad, Frank, you've brought this up, and to bring our viewers up to speed on abortion in New Hampshire. People have been so surprised about, oh my gosh, New York, this is so terrible. But, in New Hampshire, we've been there. We have been where New York now just arrived for over 23, 24 years. In 1997, when then Governor Shaheen, now Senator Shaheen, signed into law all the repeal of New Hampshire's old abortion laws, then abortion became very accessible, the same accessibility as what's in New York right now. And so it's just actually very sad in that really anyone can have an abortion. We don't know where they're being done or by whom or even what geographies they are occurring in. We don't know how many abortions are botched. So what Cornerstone has been doing, we've tried this for several years, and right now we are doing so in the form of House Bill 158, HB 158, is we're just trying to get an abortion statistics law on the books. In other words, we're trying to find out. And when I say find out, I mean we do not compromise the privacy of the woman. We do not compromise the privacy of the provider. We are not trying to find out who the providers are or who the women are. We just want to know how many babies are aborted. And we want to know, where we can find out geographically. Is it Nashua area? Is it Manchester? Is it Portsmouth? Where are the abortions being done? And because that is just the beginning of us helping both women's health and, of course, protect the baby. See, in New Hampshire, anyone can perform an abortion. And so there's a medical concern for the safety of women, as well as obviously the issue that we identify with quite easily as well, which is just the life of the baby. So that's a little bit of the picture here in New Hampshire as far as abortion is concerned.
So if you compare this on a platform of a slippery slope argument, I mean, one could make a thing saying a baby born with Down syndrome would probably be more productive in his or her life than, let's say, somebody currently affected with Alzheimer's, ALS, or a heart stroke. And is there going to be, can the politicians argue that, why keep a person with Alzheimer's, in agony any longer? Why not just inject them with, I don't know, rat poison, arsenic or something like that and end it?
Yeah, they use a different substance when they do that. You're absolutely right. As far as this, but I understand where you're headed. We are on that slippery slope. To be honest with you, we are on that slippery slope. In 17 and 18, we had to push back. There were a couple of measures that came our way that wanted to introduce physician-assisted suicide. My assumption is it will return. And so we've had to push that back the last couple of years. And like you said, it's a slippery slope. We look at both, there's a couple of states out west, I believe Oregon, perhaps Washington, but I know in Europe they do have, they have codified physician-assisted suicide. And it's just so sad. It is a slippery slope because what can start to creep into the picture is elder abuse. If there's a family members are thinking, grandma or grandpa's going to die anyways. His quality of life is so bad. Gosh, let's just get rid of grandma or grandma, because we have interest in the financial future or whatnot. It's just really, as you've said, you've used the right words. It's a slippery slope. And we want to defend life from womb to tomb.
Okay, moving right along. Now, I saw this on, in fact, I saw, it was mentioned on one of the news shows, political news, cable news shows, that President Donald Trump complimented this. Did you ever hear anything in public schools, in public like high schools, of offering like the Bible as literature?
Yeah, actually in the high school, so I went to a public high school in suburban Boston, Massachusetts, and I know that if it wasn't a full course, I know that in some of the AP literature classes, they did study the Bible as literature. So certainly any teacher who wants to pursue the Bible as literature is certainly on good constitutional grounds, So I don't know of courses in New Hampshire where that's
Yeah.
happening.
Well, they would make it elective. They would definitely not make it a requirement unless you want to go to a Christian or Catholic high school.
Right,
Then you'd have your kids raised in that
right,
format.
right.
But if they did that, how would you feel like if a Muslim family saying, why can't we have an elective, a high school elective, the Quran as literature? Or a Buddhist family saying, why not have Buddhist philosophy as an elective in high school?
Yeah, honestly, Frank, I think that'd be fine because what we're for is we're for religious liberty, and so again, as the situation that you've shared, which is an elective course on either the Bible's literature, I mean, I think that would be fine. Now, what I believe happens a lot, anyways, and which is completely fine, is in history classes or social studies. I'm assuming that I am hoping actually that in the course of say middle school and high school, students do get exposed to the major religions, and I'm assuming that they would get exposed to some of the writings of those religions. So the Bible for Judaism and Christianity, the Quran for Islam, and then of course there are Hindu writings that are also available, and then writings for Buddhism and Taoism and some of the other Eastern religions. I mean, I think it's a good education to be exposed to those things. And like you've said, though, it needs to be as literature. In other words, if the Bible is taught as literature, we can't have the teacher sermonizing on it or inviting kids to pray right there on the spot. I mean, that wouldn't be the purview of the public school. But Cornerstone believes in religious liberty. So the idea of the Bible as literature or other courses like that would certainly be on good constitutional footing, is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, okay, moving right along, I guess I noticed on the Cornerstone Action website, which, by the way, I encourage all my audience to check out. It's an excellent website that has a lot of different issues that you're involved with. And there was a thing about in public schools, SB 196, where kids are surveyed without their parents' consent on issues like oral sex, sexual identity, gender identity, drugs, alcohol use, and other salacious behavior.
Yeah, so our position is we just want we want parents we want an opt-in scenario that if the school is going to give a non-academic survey, so the things you've described are not academic, or yeah, they're more behavior surveys. They're the CDC puts out surveys that different schools can use. And our position is just, hey, if you're going to have a non-academic survey, it should be opt-in. In other words, the parents should know about it and they should have to opt in, which has passed into law. So SB 196, although it is making its way, I think I believe that it just passed in the House. But it is making its way through the legislative process, but we're sure that the governor will veto it because he's not going to sign into a law that he's not going to sign into a law that completely is counter the law that he just signed in last legislative session, which has it as we want it. In other words, right now on the books, parents must be able to opt into these surveys. And so actually, if any parent watching this learns of their child being subject to a non-academic survey and they weren't given the opportunity to opt in, that's an opportunity to just let the principal and the superintendent know, hey, by the way, here's the law. The law is that if you give this kind of survey, we have to know about it and we have to be able to opt in.
Okay. Now, just out of morbid curiosity here, what does the term gender fluid mean?
Right. So someone who's gender fluid is just saying they are not fixed in their conception of their gender, that they are not fixed, that they see gender more as a spectrum, to include things like male or female or non-binary, not fitting others. So that's a relatively recent construct in human history, and I can tell, I think by the expression on your face, that it's a little disturbing.
Yeah, I agree.
The people are great, but the idea is disturbing. And I just share that with you in the sense that, in Cornerstone, we always like to make a distinction between our clarity and our compassion, in that the sense that people who are dealing with transgender feelings, we have tons of compassion for them, but the clarity on the issue is that we believe that gender is binary, with very few exceptions. You're born male or female, and that's a God-given gift.
Ah. Okay, moving right along to House Bill 481,
Yes.
recreational marijuana in New Hampshire.
Yes.
Now, is marijuana legal in New Hampshire?
Well, yes and no. So it's legal in the sense that what is allowed right now is medical marijuana. So if with the proper signatures from health providers, you can have access to medical marijuana. There are certain dispensaries around the state that will do that. So especially for pain or epilepsy or other medically diagnosed reasons, you can access it. Now, and the other thing that is different is that it's been decriminalized for 3/4 of an ounce or less. That means that 3/4 of an ounce is a pretty good party. It's about 20 or so joints. And so, instead of it being a felony for you to have that possession, it's just a misdemeanor charge, I believe, and maybe just a fine. So, is it legal? Yes, asterisk, in the sense that it is legal medically. And the fact is, you're not going to be thrown into prison for possessing 3/4 of an ounce or less. But what this bill is, HB 481, is the desire to legalize and commercialize recreational marijuana. In other words, energy, people should be able to grow it and use it, and then they want to be able to regulate the sale of marijuana.
Now, does Cornerstone Action have a viewpoint that marijuana might be gateway drugs to, let's say, heroin and cocaine?
It's such a great question, Frank, and we do have a viewpoint in the sense that we are opposed to HB 481 because we don't think it's a good idea. Now, the question you asked, is it a gateway drug? That is a little bit disputed. So in our opposition, we haven't made that the cornerstone of our opposition because it's a little disputed. What we hear is anecdotally, the answer is yes. Anecdotally, in fact, there was a former rep who just wrote an op-ed that got passed around in some of the publications of New Hampshire, and his op-ed was, hey, absolutely, my family and I did some prison ministry, and we talked to people who were there for drug charges. Marijuana was definitely a part of the picture. Scientifically, is there data there? I think that's what's still disputed. I mean, you look at multiple sources, some say it's there and some say it's not. But the real bedrock for Cornerstone's opposition to HB 41 was just all these social and economic costs. In other words, when we look at Colorado especially, because they legalized in 2012 and then it became available in 2014. But you look at Oregon, Washington, there's been enough time that's passed that we now have some good data on that. And it's just so obvious that the costs to healthcare, the costs to law enforcement, the costs to education are so high. Do you mind if I go through a couple of those?
Sure.
All right.
Please.
All right. So, we can even just run those three right now, like healthcare. So when a retail pot shop opens in a community, the nearby ER sees a spike in adolescent visits, and they're visiting for two reasons. They're visiting because they're vomiting, because they've taken some of the edibles, even if they're outlawed, or even if the packaging, they've even when they limit the packaging so the packaging doesn't look too appealing with kids. The fact is, even in those cases, kids show up at the ER because they're vomiting. The second reason they show up at the ER is for acute mental health crises. No surprise that once they start smoking dope, there's some mental health concerns that start to arise, and that's documented. So for healthcare, it just creates an incredible burden on our healthcare system. ERs are already pretty crowded. Our emergency rooms, there's already a lot going on, and now to just throw onto that needlessly, adolescent visits because of ingesting edibles or the mental health, acute mental health crises is terrible. So I just think we can do better for our healthcare system. Second, law enforcement. Do you know that the New Hampshire Police Chiefs Association testified against HB 41 because when recreational marijuana becomes legalized, it just really puts them in a tough space. What we've seen in Colorado is the number of THC-related traffic deaths is on the rise. So even though you'll hear from the other side, you'll hear, hey, no one's ever died from smoking a joint. While that may be true, THC-related traffic fatalities are on the rise in Colorado. Ever since legalization of marijuana, they have risen. And the other thing that's so hard for law enforcement is there's no field test for sobriety with THC. In the same way we can do a breathalyzer for alcohol, you can't do that. And so there's no legally admissible way to record if someone has had THC in their system at that moment that impaired them for driving. So it's just so bad for law enforcement. And finally, for education, you talk to teachers in Colorado, in Washington, Oregon, and it's just so tough for them because, their kids are getting high, and it's just tough for them to do their mission, their educational mission. So those are some of the reasons why we've opposed it. And actually, it's funny. I happened to be in Colorado visiting a friend over I think it was the President's Day weekend, and I talked to a former state senator there, and I asked him, hey, this is going on in New Hampshire. What do you think about the legalization of cannabis, recreational marijuana? And he said, the biggest unforeseen consequence was the amount of law enforcement activity that started to happen as a result. And what he meant was, actually what he said to me was, the cartel has moved from Mexico into Denver. And what he meant was that so the black market for marijuana just grew. And actually, the drug mules, guys who are crossing the border both ways, they needed to make money on both trips. So what they would do is they would take the good pot that was coming out of Colorado now, because it was regulated, because that is a benefit, like for sure. They would take the good pot down to sell in Mexico, but they would come back because they want to make money on the return. They would come back with opiates, and they'd come back with opiates that weren't that did have nefarious substances in them that weren't really quality controlled. So he said, what? Now law enforcement is dealing with this burgeoning black market of drug activity. And I'm just thinking, is this really what we want to do in New Hampshire? We can do better than this.
And also, during the presidential election, it was a big stink in New Hampshire. Well, maybe because it's the first primary, right after the Iowa caucus, that a lot of teenagers were dying from opioid overdoses. And I'm saying that, our federal legislators, Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, and then our reps, Ann Custer and Chris Pappas, if they're not going to give some kind of good remedy on how to deal with the opioid crisis, why not just hold their nose and vote along with President Trump on the southern border?
It's a great point, Frank. And, I'm just thinking of testimony that we heard last week, when HB 41 was in front of the full House session, because it came out of Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee, voted 10-9. So it was a very close vote. And it just got out of the committee and into the full House, or, the committee voted ought to pass. Then it came out to the full floor, the full House last Wednesday, I believe it was. And I loved, there's a testimony of, there's actually 3 representatives named Pearson right now, and the one who is a firefighter, that Pearson, he testified essentially to your point that, anecdotally, the connection between opioids and marijuana is there. And that, whenever someone's involved in the drug culture, marijuana is often a beginning, and at times it leads to opioid use as well. Now, there are plenty of people that don't fall into that. There are plenty of people, like professionals, say, who have an injury, they have a surgery, and they get addicted to opiates, not having ever touched pot. That happens. But I think you're absolutely right that it just seems like we're throwing fuel onto the fire by legalizing marijuana in a culture where we are struggling so much with the opioid crisis. I would agree.
Okay, moving right along, House Bill 289, prayer in public schools. Does New Hampshire now have, well, I guess talking earlier about Bible as literature and Quran as literature, it would have to be a quote-unquote moment of silence. You couldn't have like one kid give a Christian prayer and tick off the Muslims or Buddhist or...
Yeah, HB 289 is really interesting. What I like about 289 is it is just started us on a great religious liberty conversation, like you've said, talking about the Bible's literature. So 289, there's I think a 1970s era statute that was then reaffirmed in the early 2000s that says any New Hampshire public school elementary teacher can lead students in a recitation of the Lord's Prayer if they want. Now, we don't know of anyone who does this. But so 289, HB 289 was just a measure to strike that from the statutes. And Cornerstone agrees that the statute that allows teachers to lead their students in reciting the Lord's Prayer, it's probably not constitutionally sound. In other words, it probably wouldn't stand constitutional muster. But we heard from some of the sponsors of the bill that they considered that original statute as a virus in the statutes, in the RSAs in New Hampshire. And to us, that sounded like animus. Animus is just the legalese term for hate. And so that's why we came in and said, gosh, is there not room for an amendment here where we can, I get it, we can remove the statute that allows teachers to lead kids in saying the Lord's Prayer, but we can still put in some sort of amendment that would say, New Hampshire is for the religious liberty of its students and its faculty. Outside of instructional time, people should be able to pray outside of instructional time. We just wanted to affirm, especially student religious liberty at school. So, an interesting thing happened in that that bill was actually tabled. It was actually, I think they didn't want the conversation. The committee, the education committee, kind of could see where things were heading. I think they just didn't want to deal with it, so it was tabled. But and just to be clear on the situation right now is that in 2010, a federal appeals court upheld a New Hampshire law that does require schools to set a time daily for students to voluntarily recite the Pledge of Allegiance. So
I was going to do the next one. Okay.
Yeah, I think you wanted me to address a little bit the Pledge of Allegiance as well, and so teachers can set aside time to do it, but they can't compel people to say it. Students can do it voluntarily.
Oh, okay. So that's the compromise there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I want to be clear, regarding HB 289, it was tabled, and it just means the conversation will happen again next year, I suppose.
Oh, okay. And I assume you and the Cornerstone Action are really upfront and know when the bills are coming before the state legislature on like a weekly or monthly basis.
It's weekly, and so that's why we so want people to visit nhcornerstone.org. And then there's a button there that says join us. And the join us button is just so that we can keep you posted weekly of what's going on. Because the way that the legislature works from January to June, when the legislature is in session, we don't know what the next week's schedule is until the Thursday night before that week. So what we'll do is we'll look at the whole schedule for you. And then usually Saturday morning, we'll send out an email saying, this is what's coming up this week. And, regarding some of our wheelhouse issues. So yes, there's so much going on that, that's why we would invite people to leverage Cornerstone's expertise and get involved on, join our email list so we can just let you know what's happening.
Excellent. And here's an off the wall question. To the best of your knowledge, has any New Hampshire public school student ever got suspended or disciplined for wearing a Make America Great Again hat or shirt?
Yeah, not to our knowledge. We don't know of any student having any difficulties for wearing any MAGA gear. Okay.
It's I don't know if that's going to be an issue that comes up or pops up. It's not right if an administrator or a teacher disciplines them, suspends them, or something like that, just for expressing himself like that.
Yeah.
I mean, if they wear something vulgar, Trump bleeps, or something vulgar and profanity, I can understand them on a dress code saying, you got to get out of here, whether, but, just to say, Trump 2020, make America great again, that's not right.
Yeah, we would agree. And I think, most school districts have language that says that attire, must just not take away from the instructional mission, that sort of thing. And so I couldn't see how anything a candidate or a sitting president or a slogan from anyone, I can't see that being a problem. That the student does not leave his or her First Amendment rights at the door just by entering the school.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. So hopefully they'll never ever become a problem in New Hampshire. But there's a first time for everything, I guess. So, um, let's see. Oh, okay. Another thing that was interesting on your website, you had Cornerstone Action has something to do with the decriminalization of prostitution.
Well, yeah, and so that has been an issue that we have cared about. The fact that we have cared about prostitution, we've cared about sex trafficking, but a really interesting thing happened just, gosh, a month or so ago. So a wonderful bill was put out called HB 201, and by a wonderful legislator in Littleton, and she sponsored and I think was the primary author of this bill, and the whole purpose of the bill, to us, it just seemed like a wonderful bill. The whole purpose of the bill was to increase the penalties for Johns, users of purchasers of sex from trafficked minors. So in other words, we can't think of a single person who would disagree with wanting to raise the penalties for people who purchase sex from trafficked minors. It was such a straightforward bill. But wouldn't you know it, that there is a group that came in and said, whoa, 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 we're sex workers. We're people who we earn our income by prostituting ourselves. And before this bill goes forward, we want to make sure, that you hear us, that you hear our story. And it's just this, as different people have said, this bill was completely hijacked by the sex worker industry. We know that there's money behind it. We know that there's, big lobbying behind it. And to our great dismay, the committee also retained the bill or tabled the bill. It means they just said, you know what, instead of just moving forward on this and just raising the penalties for users of, for purchasers of sex with trafficked minors, we're going to wait. And so the sad thing about that is it gives the sex worker industry time to kind of, they've just halted the process. And we just think this is not wise and not good. So our interest is in seeing trafficked minors set free. Our interest is in curbing prostitution, and so we are just so dismayed by the hijacking of this bill, which really they really had nothing to do with each other.
What surprised me about seeing that on your website, I never really looked at New Hampshire as having a major prostitution problem. I think you'd have to go to Massachusetts, like Lowell, Lawrence, Boston, and probably some other cities. But then again, if it's the world's oldest profession, even like Nashua, Manchester, Concord, Salem must have some degree of prostitution for guys who want to avail themselves of that service.
Right. And again, we have lots to learn on that as far as frequency of that sort of thing. I know that what we are being educated on so well by several different national organizations is the amount of sex trafficking that goes on. In other words, especially minors who are held against their will, used for sex trafficking. I mean, you mentioned that you've had a guest on your show named Jasmine before.
Yes.
And we actually just,
I saw that on your video. Yeah.
Yeah, we've just shot a wonderful video with her. We want to get her story out to more people so that especially as this conversation starts to happen about sex trafficking of minors and prostitution, and there's so many links between them, just because you go from 17 to 18, doesn't mean that there's still there's still a whole lot of brokenness that's going on there. But we want to get Jasmine's story out there, for the very reasons we're talking about here.
And one more thing, I mean, there's a lot of especially with the president of the New England Patriots just being caught in Florida. There's a lot of big stink about sex trafficking, like women from China, but a lot of women from South America and Latin America. But yet another good reason to push the southern border. I mean, whether or not you like Trump or hate Trump, I mean, hold your nose and just vote for it. And for the sake of opioid control, at least drug control and human trafficking coming from that area of the world.
Yeah, and of course, the big surprise is I mean, I see your point, Frank. I mean, for sure about, hey, should we build the wall? I mean, certainly there's a good rationale. I mean, I know you haven't asked me about this, but there's no doubt that our immigration system just needs some fixing, and I think the wall
Yes.
can be a part of that solution. But I did want to address, when it comes to human trafficking, so much of it is domestic. In other words, the profile is usually more the
Yeah.
runaway, the domestic
Like Jasmine was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like they're just runaway or life starting, all sorts of challenges in the nuclear family, which again, it kind of leads to a huge area for Cornerstone is just strengthening the family, because the more that the family is intact, the less these kind of scenarios happen. But Jasmine's a great example of just domestic situation. Someone, just runs away, that sort of thing, and before they know it, they've got essentially a pimp. They don't even know it's a pimp, but a pimp is validating them and then starts to have them turn tricks. And before they know it, they're caught in a lifestyle. And even though there may not be physical bonds, I mean, they may not be physically handcuffed, they're psychologically, emotionally, against their will, being held by a John, or by a pimp, excuse me, not by John, by a pimp. And so it's an
Ah.
awful scenario.
Okay. So also I saw on your website, the Cornerstone Action website, a program for, I guess, college students, the summer internship program.
Yeah,
What a
last
great
year
opportunity.
it really was. And I have to tell you, we had a great class last year. We had students from Gordon College in Massachusetts. We had students from Northeast Catholic College up there in Warner, New Hampshire. We had students from Liberty University down in Virginia.
Okay.
We had students from Yale, a little college you might know about in Connecticut,
Yeah.
a little university down there. So we just had this very high quality class. And the college internship has a couple of goals. One is we want to expose these students, because I mean, I'm telling you, these guys are movers and shakers. They care about policy. A lot of them have futures either in advocacy or in policy or in the legal profession, and we just wanted to expose them to a lot of the movers and shakers in New Hampshire, in regards to politics, in regards to people of faith, communities of faith. We wanted to expose them to some of the people who are in those arenas. So we did that. And then we also had them do some writing for us, because we are trying to create a resource for faith groups and for civic groups on, what does good citizenship look like, especially if you're coming from a Judeo-Christian background. They did some writing for us. And they also helped out with my main goal, which is connecting with leaders of faith communities, pastors, rabbis, priests. My goal is to connect with those leaders. And so last summer, something we'll probably do again this summer, is the interns helped us host regional breakfasts, different breakfasts in regions of New Hampshire, so that we could gather pastors, priests, rabbis, say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what the last legislative session looked like. This is what's coming down the pike, and we need you guys engaged, and we need your parishioners engaged, because if we're silent, then we shouldn't be complaining about the laws that we have.
Ah. And moving right along, when talking about summer activity, I was just trying to pin like your organization, and you had told me before that Cornerstone Action has been in business, has been an operating entity for like 18 years,
Yes, it's been around for almost 20 years. You're right.
and yet there's a Soulfest Christian music festival at the Gunstock Ski Resort in the Lakes region that you guys never had a display table at.
And I couldn't be more thankful for you bringing that to my attention.
Okay.
It's funny. Last summer, I did talk with some of the leadership of Soulfest, and I kind of explored it, but wasn't able to pull the trigger. But I think you're onto something, Frank. I think that it would be really great if Cornerstone could have a presence at Soulfest, because we certainly want to tap into the younger generations. They're the future leaders, they're the future decision makers for our state and our country. So we'd be remiss not to be there. And my job as the director of strategic alliances, my job is to inspire the church to engage with government for the sake of God's kingdom. And so, as you say, at Soulfest, there's so many kids who are engaging with a larger vision for their lives. They're kind of engaging with the fact that God's got a mission for them. And so, to your point, Frank, it's so appropriate that we be there at Soulfest and just let some of the youth, or it's not just youth, I know whole families come, but let the youth and the young adults and families, let them know that we're around.
And for 3 full days, you'd be like what they call preaching to the choir. You'd have thousands, maybe tens of thousands of Christians, people who want to hear Christian music and take avail of Christian teachings and stuff like that, and you'd have a display table right there. You know, eh,
I think we got to pay you, and then Soulfest has got to pay you because
yeah,
you're selling them so well.
okay.
You're onto something, Frank. I think we got to do it.
And the guy that tipped me off to you, Greg Winslow,
What?
a guest on this show a couple times regarding his New England prayer night for New England.
Yes.
So you went to his prayer night this past October 28th.
Yeah, what a special night that was. Back in October, and as we were talking about even before the show, it happened to be the night that the Red Sox won the World Series.
Yep.
But what a special night. I think several thousand gathered in this new arena. We had wonderful rhythms of prayer and worship that night. And so I was a part of the one that focused right on the government sphere. We want to be people of prayer, and we want to pray into all different areas like business and arts and entertainment and education, but we also want to pray for government. And so when it came for government, there were 5 of us. There was 4 pastors and myself who led the gathering in prayer for our government. And what a special night that was. And I'm so thankful for Greg Winslow, who has championed, if my people, New England. I'm so grateful. And of course, now the strategy now has been doing it in regions. So we had an If My People New England event just for Manchester a few Sundays ago. It was at the Vineyard there in Manchester. And what a great gathering, and just great time praying for some of the things going on in our culture right now.
No, do you personally reside in the Manchester area?
So personally, I actually reside on the seacoast of Mass. I actually live in Newburyport, Mass. What's really funny about this, though, is my counterpart in our counterpart organization in Massachusetts actually lives in New Hampshire. So we do this every day. But and if just to share, because this actually warrants a little context, and that is. Cornerstone, you'd said, hey, Cornerstone's about 20 years old. It is. And Cornerstone is one of 40 partner organizations. In other words, there's 40 states in the United States that have a family policy council like Cornerstone. And we all fall under an umbrella organization called the Family Policy Alliance. And what we notice is states that have these family policy councils, they do better on a lot of the religious liberty scores, because we are, getting the faithful together and saying, hey, we need to preserve religious liberty in our country. It's one of the founding principles of our country. Anyways, my point is that so in New England right now, 4 of the 6 New England states have a family policy council. Maine does, New Hampshire does, Massachusetts does, and Connecticut does. There are rumblings in both Rhode Island and Vermont. In other words, things are happening in both those states where I think soon we'll see a family policy council there, and then all 6 New England states will have family policy councils. But I say that to share my counterpart in Mass, and it's called Mass Family Institute there. We connect a lot. We cross each other every day going to work, and just.
And I was going to say,
yeah.
I did want to have somebody from Soulfest on my show for their 20th anniversary, but we never really connected. But the organization is either centered in Newburyport, Massachusetts, or Amesbury.
I think their mailing address actually is in Newburyport. So it's in my
You're right
backyard.
there,
Yeah, it's my backyard.
Oh, wow.
That's so fun.
So no, when you met Greg Winslow, were you in the same denomination or the same church with him, or?
We're not. But we are a part of a network called the New Hampshire Alliance. And the New Hampshire Alliance is just a group of like-minded churches and ministries that really want to see unity in the body of Christ in New Hampshire. One of their founding or really inspirational scriptures comes from John 17. And in John's gospel, in the 17th chapter, we see Jesus' prayer. And he's praying for the church before he is arrested and then crucified and then resurrected. And his prayer then was, Father, let them, let my church, let the disciples, let them be one as you and I are one. And so what the New Hampshire Alliance seeks to do is it seeks to gather the church, all the different denominations. We talked about 3 streams, Catholic, Orthodox, and Evangelical at the beginning of the show. And they really seek to gather all those streams together so that we can accomplish God's purposes in New Hampshire. So it's actually through that network called the New Hampshire Alliance that I know Greg Winslow.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, that settles that. So, anywho, well, time flies when you're having fun, eh, Neil?
Absolutely.
Wow, I was just told I'm exhausted. I did ask like 10, about a dozen questions or so, and you answered, responded to them in a very, quick, concise, and very informative manner. But is there anything that we have not discussed which you'd like to bring up at this point, or anything we have discussed which you'd like to elaborate on a little bit from now till the end of the show?
Frank, I'm so glad you're asking me that.
Okay.
Give me an opportunity to talk, I'll do it. Well, I just wanted to go back to my main role again. I'm the Director of Strategic Alliances, and so I want to inspire the church to engage with government for the sake of God's kingdom. I think that, my passions are really awakening the church, or the faithful. And that does, I'm anyone who kind of adheres to Orthodox Judeo-Christian values, I want to see them awaken to what's going on in Concord. And so there's several things that I like to do. One of the things is, I can do a Concord 101 seminar for a small group, for a Sunday school class, for a church. I can even kind of preach on that, because I just think it's so important that the church not just stay within the four walls of the church, but that we engage with our legislators and, with what's going on in Concord. What I love, Frank, seeing the aha on people's faces, both pastors and congregants, when they realize that, New Hampshire, 1.3 million people, but the third largest legislative body in the world. So New Hampshire legislature has 400 reps and 24 senators. It is as their own website says, they're the third largest legislative body in the world. And so my point is that means that they're very local. Where we live in New Hampshire, our reps are nearby. They're literally our neighbors. These representatives, they only make $100 a year, $100. It's a citizen legislature, so they're not doing it for the money.
Yeah.
Very few of them are doing it for the fame, because when you talk to legislators, especially ones at the end of their term, or if they've held successive terms, it's an old adage in politics that, when you become political, you lose half your friends. And so, they're not doing it for the fame, because as they take positions on things in their districts, about 50% of people get mad at him. So my point is that these guys, they need our support. They need human contact, with pastors and with the church. They need to know that we're there, thankful and appreciative, for who they are. Because even 1 Peter 2:14 says that leaders and governors are there to reward evil and to reward good. Excuse me. It feels like that now.
Yeah.
To reward good and punish evil, and that so we need to respect them. And so I like to I like to mobilize the church and say, what can we do to, serve our legislators? What can we do to love them? But then also to say, and here's how Concord works, because a lot of people don't know, that their legislators aren't paid. They don't know that their legislators are, they're from January to June, they're showing up in Concord 3, 4, 5 days a week. Even when it snows, they got to be there. They don't know that. And of course, they don't know exactly how the whole process works. Like, how does an idea become a bill? How does a bill get discussed, and how does it become a law? And so I love doing my little Concord 101 seminar with churches, just educating people on how the process works, because then the aha moment comes and they realize, oh my gosh, if there's a bill I care about, like the ones that we've talked about today, if I care about this issue, if they sign up to Cornerstone and something pops up there, we're like, oh no, we don't want this, or yes, we want this. Then we've taught them. It's so easy to call your legislator, to be respectful and kind, but also to share your opinion. And we teach them how to write to their legislator. We teach them how to call the governor's office. So if a bill has made it to the governor, it means he's either going to sign it or he's going to veto it. And we show people how how they can best communicate with the governor and let them know how they really feel about stuff. So that's a passion of mine, is engaging the church, showing them how they can be biblical citizens in today's culture. I love serving pastors. I love getting pastors to Concord. So usually once a quarter, we have a State House prayer tour and luncheon where Cornerstone serves pastors lunch. Usually get there around 10 o'clock, and we have a couple of representatives or former representatives who are also pastors, and they actually lead the tour, and they bring us to the different, the House of Representatives. They bring us to the Senate. We pray in those spots. We begin at the Hall of Flags, which is really a memorial to fallen soldiers, of New Hampshire who've served in all sorts of wars. It's a very holy place. And we thank God there, for the sacrifice of those who've gone before us. We cross the street and we go to the legislative office building, and we go to the place where all the work of the legislature is done, where all the hearings are done, and people realize, the pastors realize, oh my gosh, I can share my testimony at one of these hearings. I have a voice, and I can share that voice. So all this stuff and more is all on our website, at nhcornerstone.org. If you look at the pastor's page.
Let me interject for 2 seconds. I know New Hampshire Right to Life has, and I believe Cornerstone Action has it for like rating or giving report cards for legislators.
Yeah, we do what we can on that. In other words, with such a large legislature, there are so many freshmen that come every 2 years that basically what we can do is we can offer a survey and we can share the results of that survey. So we do share as much information as we can get on the candidates so that people who are connected to Cornerstone can have an informed vote. And we do try to do that. That's right.
Okay. So wow, that's interesting. Very clear, concise, and right to the point. I kind of like that.
Oh, thanks, Frank. Just
But,
fun to be with you today.
Yeah, and well, same here. So I'll have to, on future issues that pop up, I'll definitely have to bring you aboard again. Maybe the election next year. That might be on what they're talking about, even though it's a federal presidential election. But there's still like local people too that we could probably talk about as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of towns are having elections now, like in March, and
Yeah.
so that's going on, and of course, although Cornerstone, our main wheelhouse is the state of New Hampshire, we can obviously talk about federal issues that affect us all. We'd love to talk about that and election cycles and all that good stuff.
Definitely. So, and one more thing. Well, I think while you were watching Neil, all through the show, we had his website on the TV screen. I highly exhort you to go to his website, the Cornerstone
Yes.
website at nhcornerstone.org.
.org. That's right.
And if there's any like questions or comments, because there is feedback on that website that if they have any questions, they can talk to you or somebody. And
Absolutely. Yep. They can send an email to us, or if they go to the pastor's page, that area, my email is there, and I'd love to hear from folks.
excellent. So with that said and done, I just say take care, God bless, and join us next time on another episode of Frankly Speaking. Thank you very much.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.